Okay, they've had their minute. So, hello everybody. Thank you very much for joining us at today's uh, webinar of the Private Sector Development Research Network. My name is Paddy Carter. I am the head of Development Economics at British International Investment. If by chance you don't know who that is, British International Investment (BII) is the United Kingdom's bilateral development finance institution. We're a very old organisation. I think we're 75 years old, but our new name is only a couple of years old. You might have known us under our old name, CDC. So I'm going to start by just giving a bit of context before handing over to Neil and Nuria. The fourth International Conference on Financing for Development is going to be held in Seville in about a month's time. And the idea of using public capital to mobilize private investment has been a big part of financing for development policy over the last decade. But maybe the consensus now is that the billions to trillions agenda has been a bit of a failure. And some commentators are starting to lose faith in the whole idea. Now, I think that would be a mistake. I think blended finance is a powerful tool that is really achieving a positive impact on the ground. Uh, and I think we still want to make the most of it. I think the problem has been one of unrealistic expectations. The idea that we could simply pull on our levers of blended finance and redirect billions of assets out of rich countries and into poor countries, it never made much sense because when it comes to private investment, you can only put money into a business that wants to raise capital. It's not like grant aid where governments or NGOs will happily accept as much money as you want to give them. I hope that's not unfair. I think that's fair. The volume of private investment it's determined by the intersection of supply and demand. And what we're going to about today is it's about how development finance institutions and perhaps other actors can depart from the traditional demand-led model in which we can only make investment when we find someone who wants to raise capital by creating investment opportunities rather than just responding to them. I must quickly say that I'm not suggesting that sponsoring new ventures is the answer to turning billions into trillions. I think the only way you could do that would be to have a magic wand that is capable of ushering in a sustained economic boom, the like of which China saw at the end of the last century. Um, but that said, BII's platforms have mobilized significant sums of private investment in the hundreds of millions, with more to come as various projects under development reach financial close. But while mobilization is certainly a big part of the story, creating new ventures really starts from a desire to meet unmet development needs that we cannot meet through our usual business model of investing in existing businesses. We would always prefer to invest in an existing business if we can. We're not here to compete with private businesses. Sponsoring a new enterprise is it's something that we do as something of a last resort. It usually requires many years of effort by our investment professionals and lawyers to get these things off the ground, and that's often followed by many more years of putting capital into a business before we start to see signs of success, which is quite a nerve-wracking thing to be doing. BII is quite unusual amongst DFIs because we are allowed to take controlling positions, majority stakes in businesses. Most DFIs cannot. And because we're not a bank, we don't have a credit rating or capital adequacy to worry about. We have more ability than most to take risks, and we have a shareholder, the FCDO, that is fully behind us on that. But we wanted to support ODI's work on this topic because we hope that other DFIs and perhaps foundations and others who might want to deploy catalytic capital to create investment opportunities, we hope they might be inspired by it and start to think about how they might move in this direction. Okay, that's enough from me. I'm going to hand over to Neil and Nuria now. Thank you.
Thank you, Paddy, for the introduction. My name's Neil Gregory. I'm Senior Research Associate at ODI Global. I'll be presenting with my colleague Nuria Graviotto, and this work was also done together with Bianca Getzer. What we're going to do is take you through a short slide presentation, and then we look forward to an interactive discussion. So I'm going to share my screen and find the presentation. Okay, so I think Paddy has given us a good introduction to why we're interested in this topic, but there simply aren't enough investable opportunities for DFIs to deliver on the strategies that they've been agreed with their shareholders. And as regular development aid is in retreat at the moment, the expectations are that DFIs will step up and do even more, but that's a challenge where often they're not even able to do all they want to do in terms of development priorities and country priorities. So we're interested in learning from the experience of those DFIs which have taken the initiative to create new investment opportunities. And the two that have done this the most are BII from the UK and Northend, who have done this often together, but sometimes separately. And so we thought it was instructive to look at the rationale for doing this and the experience of how it's worked in practice to understand the operational implications, so we can draw some conclusions for other DFIs and governments who may be interested in this extension of the role of DFIs. So just to be clear what we're talking about, we're really talking about a range of situations where the DFI plays the role of a sponsor in setting up a new enterprise or platform. There are various ways in which this can be done, and so things which are within scope for the study are where the DFI is either the sole shareholder or the controlling shareholder in a company, or manages or shares in the management of some kind of open-ended fund. We're not looking here at traditional close-end funds where the DFI may invest as a limited partner. We're not looking at traditional project finance or SPVs, which may be created for individual infrastructure projects. So we're really looking at where the DFI has an active management role in creating new ongoing ventures with an unlimited life. And so in the portfolios of BII and Northend, we find a number of examples of these which are listed on this slide. A lot of them have a focus on Africa, which is maybe the region where DFIs face the biggest challenges in finding investment opportunities. A number of them have been in infrastructure, but also in forestry, agribusiness, SME finance, even healthcare. So this model has been applied across different sectors in a range of mainly frontier markets. And besides BI and Northend, other DFIs have also partnered in some of these platforms in different forms. So the rationale for doing this can be a number of different things. For some, it's really about market development in the sense of either proving an opportunity for a new business model or product, or proving an opportunity in terms of taking business models to new countries or regions. For some platforms, there's also a mobilization objective that it's creating investment opportunities, not just for DFIs, but that may attract co-financing from private investors. This may be about creating pipelines of investable projects. It may be by helping investors take risk on new markets that they wouldn't otherwise go into on their own. And then there's a rationale for setting up these platforms at arm's length from the parent DFI in terms of how you manage talent and expertise and providing them with autonomy and more streamlined decision-making than making investment decisions through normal DFI processes. So we see a mix of these objectives in different platforms, as this next slide shows. So you can see the primary objectives highlighted in green for a number of cases, which we'll talk about in more detail later, but you can see a number of them have secondary objectives shown in grey as well. So there isn't one objective that's common across all platforms, but what is in common is it requires a DFI to take the initiative to make this investment happen, that it's not something which another sponsor brings to the DFI, but the DFI actually has to create on its own. And so let me pass to Navia, who's going to dig into this a bit more and talk about some of the examples of this.
No, I'm presenting next with the case studies, but I can go through.
Is this not your slide, Navia? Okay, let me continue then.
Yeah.
Kind of stop the slide short. So in terms of structures which we see being used by the DFIs, there's a range from being an active minority shareholder all the way through to being 100% shareholder. But what we see is both limited liability companies and incorporated joint ventures, and in some cases these platforms can be structured as evergreen funds which have an unlimited life. But the key point is that these are permanent corporate structures, not just project structures which have a limited life. And there's a trade-off between keeping 100% ownership, which means that the DFI has complete control over how these platforms operate, or partnering with like-minded investors, which can bring in more capital and can benefit from the expertise of others. So we see that in some cases, BI and Northend are the 100% owner of these platforms. In other cases, there are multiple partners in them. Now, in some cases, there may be some existing assets in the sector which can be aggregated by these platforms, and acquiring existing assets can be helpful, both in getting these new corporations to generate revenue more quickly and become financially sustainable at an earlier stage. And for the DFI financing these ventures, they're really playing the role of a venture capital provider. And it's typical for venture capital, you provide different rounds of funding as the business grows and develops, and as it enters the market, it may need to adapt its strategy. And so it's more of an iterative process. It's not that you have a blueprint which you fund 100% up front. You start with an initial round of funding, initial strategy, and then it evolves over time. And at some point, you may be able to exit and sell out the DFI participation to private investors. That's not always the case, but we do have some examples where we've seen that happen. And what we find is that the DFI is basically delegating the management of the venture. And so selecting an appropriate management team and providing them the right incentives and compensation is key to the operational success of these businesses. So now let me pass to Navia to take you through some examples.
Thank you, Neil, and sorry for that. So now with the next two slides, we are going to zoom in some of the case studies that we studied for this report. We went through a total of 12 platforms, as Neil was presenting, and then we will speak a little bit on what the findings have led us to. So the first one is Ayana, and the Ayana is very interesting because it allows us to go through the full cycle of the platform. The Ayana platform was established by BII in 2018, and the objective was of expanding India's renewable energy in lower income states in India. And the initial investment from BII was on equity investment, and it was of a total of $100 million. Here, the success of setting a solid management team and reaching very quickly the initial energy target, which was of 300 megawatts by 2020, allowed BII to attract new investors, diversify the strategy geographically, so start to intervene also in other states in India, but also encompass opportunistic acquisitions in the renewable sector, and that was particularly in the solar and wind energy. The two strategic investors joined the IANA platform. One of them was the National Investment and Infrastructure Fund, which was a fund created by the government of India for infrastructure investing. And the second one was the Green Growth Equity Fund, a private equity fund focused on investing in commercially viable opportunities across climate-related sectors, and notably in the renewable and storage energy sectors. The two together acquire a total of 51% of IANA's stakes, with an initial investment of $170 million. From the IANA case, what we found that was interesting to share is, or highlight, is that its capital structure includes a significant amount of debt raised at the project level from both domestic and international banks and financial institutions, which was largely used to finance the construction and expansion. Once the related projects would reach a stable operational phase and risk would be lower, loans would be then refinanced at lower rates. This approach allowed IANA to free up capital, which could then be reinvested into new projects and expansion efforts. And this was very much the case, and by end of 2024, the IANA platform had mobilized at 1.8 billion, and in February 2025, it was sold to Indian investors at an enterprise value of 2.3 billion. In IANA's platform, what we found is that the combination of both the experience of the VII staff in similar operation and the entrance of the domestic investors, both were key to allow IANA to grow and reach the success that we've seen in the end. The second case, next slide. It's the Able Nordic platform, which operates in a completely different sector. Able Nordic is a public-private joint venture established in 2028 to invest in and will up for financial inclusion institutions in Africa, South Asia, and Southeast Asia through predominantly equity investment, but also loans. Able Nordic's mission is to build sustainable finance institutions that enable low-income households in developing countries to create a better future. An interesting detail with Able Nordic, differing from other platforms, is that is the important role that FIR play, and FIR being a Norwegian private investor, in establishing together with Northern the Able Nordic platform in 28, because this is an example that starts from a truly joint public-private partnership, and there also FIR later on through the platform play also a very important role in attracting other private investors. Currently, the shareholders of the managing company are on the public side Norfund and IFU, the Danish DFI, with a 66.6% of the shares, and on the private side we can find FIR, KLP, DNB holding the rest of the shares. Norfund's and IFU's investment in Able Nordic and the trust they generate have been key to attract the private investors, and it continues to do so as the initiative grows. Able Nordic start with 2 funds, and it's currently mobilizing for the 5th fund. So on the moving forward on the Able Nordic, it can be categorized as an impact fund, which also has attracted a lot of private investors that have been attracted by this kind of impact investment. And to date, Able Nordic has been able to mobilize approximately $226 million. Last interesting information to share on the Able Nordic, or what makes this case a bit specific, is throughout the life of the Able Nordic, it has set up a risk mitigation tool financed by the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and managed managed by Norfund to cover currency risk initially in one of the funds, but this tool has been later on expanded to cover the rest of the Able Nordic funds. And also an interesting detail from the Able Nordic platform is the setup of a technical assistance facility, which also have been supporting the capacity building of the institutions, financial institutions with which Able Nordic invests. And both facilities have played a crucial role and contributed to the success of Able Nordic in mobilizing private capital. Next slide, please. In terms of what have been the findings that we have discovered through the 12 case studies. First of all, the time horizon. Setting these kind of initiatives requires a long-term commitment from the DFI management to design, to incubate and supervise a venture, and to tie up its capital in it. And all these type of ventures are typically intended to be structures with long lives, and there might be limited prospects to exit in the short or medium term. That's while DFIs might intend to exit regular investments in about 5 to 10 years. What we observe through these platforms and joint ventures is that they might require a longer period and commitment beyond probably the 10 years. That said, we also identified that it's also important to identify from the outset of the initiative exit strategies that contemplate different possible scenarios that could lead an exit or potential responses in between if it's not total exit. The skill sets, it's also an important element. Platforms and joint ventures require a different skill set, from developing a new venture from scratch, arranging financing, hiring a management team, and guiding it through its setup and growth phase, and requires different internal processes within the DFI. What we could observe through the case studies is that building up the right skill sets could also slow and complicate the preparation and implementation of the new ventures, and in that and their patience from the DFI and supporting and accompanying the process has been also very important. At the operational level, new ventures will typically rely, at least initially, on operational support, including human resources, procurement, ESG, impact assessment, legal and accounting functions supplied by the parent DFI. Thus, DFI teams should be ready to provide such support. And from the study, we do not have data to assess the cost of setting up and providing operational support to the new ventures, but we would recommend DFIs to offer these services to platforms and joint ventures on a cost recovery basis, while ensuring incentives are in place to maintain a lean structure. On the accounting side, with ventures, DFIs have management control, which raises the question on whether the venture needs to be consolidated onto the DFI balance sheet for financial reporting. That would be from the cases that we have seen. That would be undesirable for different reasons that are explained further in the report. With these ventures, DFIs need corporate structures that allow them to hold equity stakes as investments rather than consolidate them into their balancing sheets. And over to you, Neil.
Thanks, Maria. In the time available, we've only been able to show you a couple of examples, but just to mention that there are 12 case studies, and each of them is quite different and has different objectives and different mobilization performance, different partners. So there's real diversity of experience in how this basic concept has been applied to different development challenges. So what we see is that this is a very powerful and flexible tool which DFIs can add to their toolkit. As Paddy said at the beginning, DFI's normal business where they can do it is to be a minority investor or lender to businesses sponsored by others. So we don't see this as something which would ever become the mainstream business. of DFIs, but we think it's an important tool which could be added to the toolkit to extend the reach of DFIs beyond what they're able to do in their traditional business model. So to do this, as Naria said, really the key is to be able to take controlling equity positions to be able to play this active sponsor role. And we recognize that not all DFIs have the balance sheet or the mandate, or maybe not permitted by regulations to do this. But we do think that where this is the case, it may be possible for DFIs to collaborate and group together to support these platforms. A number of these platforms, BAI and Northend, partnered together, and Northend probably wouldn't have been able to sponsor them on their own, but they're able to co-sponsor them with DFI. So we think that with the BII, so we think that's an option. And more generally, co-creating platforms can share the risk of these platforms, as well as sharing the benefits of generating further investable opportunities. I think other DFIs can also support platforms by taking minority shares or providing long-term debt to the platforms, and of course can participate in financing sub-projects developed by the platforms. But to come back to what we said earlier, the key is to be able to create these kind of open-ended structures which have a long time horizon and flexibility to adapt to changing market circumstances. While this may be more work to set up front, we need to compare that effort with the fact that as long life platforms, you can achieve development impact, you can achieve mobilization over a sustained long-term period of time. It's not just like one investment which will mature and get paid back. These long life permanent capital structures. But for DFIs to do this, there's also an agenda for governments as their shareholders to provide them the appropriate authorizing environment and support to enable them to do so. And we've encouraged shareholders to look at DFIs in the context of the broader development finance ecosystem, where DFIs can play a key role in originating assets which can be financed by both domestic and foreign investors and other DFIs and MDBs. So even if not all DFIs can play an active role in sponsoring new ventures, those that can play a very key role in the broader financial ecosystem. So governments need to provide the authorizing environment in terms of being willing to accept the risk of venture creation, like venture capital. Everywhere, this is an uncertain business. It will not always pay off. It will not always work. And even where it does, it may take a number of years before you realize the impact that you're looking for and the financial returns that you need to sustain the business. So what we're talking about is allowing DFIs to place bigger bets over a longer time period for a bigger development payoff. Shareholders may also need to adapt operational policies to allow DFIs to play this management control role in ventures. They may need to adapt the financial structure of the DFI to enable the DFIs to make equity commitments, especially for controlling stakes. And of course, we'd expect shareholders to set clear targets for the impact and the mobilization that these platforms and ventures achieve. So we think there's a lot to be learned from the experience of BAI and Northend and other DFIs in this area, as DFIs are looking for new ways to increase their scale and impact. We think that these cases and the accompanying research can offer some interesting ideas for future investment strategies. So with that, we'll pass back to Paddy and look forward to your questions and discussion. Thank you.
Okay, well, I have a couple of questions in the chat I can certainly respond to, and then hopefully we might pick up a few more. Frederic asks about how we identify these platforms. I think that everything that we do is trying to respond to needs and what countries want. At the same time, I think that these ideas kind of necessarily have to originate in the minds of investment professionals that have been trying to achieve something and have been unable to do it, or that they've observed an absence in some sort. So, for instance, Globelec, the power developer, um, came because we thought that there weren't enough or even any really large, well-capitalized, solid developers who were really putting project development investment into the countries where we wanted to see power investments taking place. GridWorks was created because we think that transmission and distribution is a huge problem in many African countries, and there were no private businesses that were set up to identify and bid for and develop projects in that area. I think a very interesting business that we've created is Growth Investment Partners in Ghana. And this is interesting because it is a model that if it works in Ghana, we can replicate hopefully in other countries. And that originated from, I think, years and years of DFIs trying to find the right ways of getting finance, the right type of finance, into the hands of smaller businesses, and realizing that there's banks can do certain things for you, but they can't do everything. Private equity funds will achieve certain things, but they won't meet every need. And that we couldn't find any finance, any lenders that were providing flexible growth oriented lending to mid-sized firms. We just think that was a complete gap in the market, and that came out of focus groups and all sorts of in-country work and research that the teams did. And so that was born out of that identification of a need. And I think it's a very interesting question. I was trying to think what I should say about this, about what are the next ones going to be? Like, where are we going to find new gaps where we think that there is potential for a DFI to create something that is going to succeed in meeting development needs. And I think I'm not going to speculate here. I know we've got some ideas around internally, but I think it's probably premature for me to mention them. But I think that that's, in a way, that's part of what what we're talking about here is. It's very important, but it's not something that's going to scale massively, because it does require like this quite unusual circumstance of you being able to see something that nobody else is doing anything about, and you think you can do something about. And that is not something that happens every day. There's another question about mega investment trends. Well, in a sense, IANA was unusual because many of the other platforms are in areas where there's not really any interest from private enterprises, which tells you that private enterprises do not see enormous demand. They do not think they're going to make tons of money by being active in this area, so they're not active in it. IANA was a bit different because it was riding a mega investment trend, which was the enormous demand for investment in renewable energy in India. And the reason why we set up IANA was because we saw that there was that massive unmet demand, and we did some analysis, and we thought that the domestic financial sector and other international investors, substantial though they were not enough to meet that demand, and we couldn't find anybody that we regarded as suitable for us to invest through, so we created something. So that response to a mega investment trend, it was there, but I don't know whether the other platforms are what you would call responses to mega investment trends. Although, should demand for, let's say, investment in renewable energy pick up dramatically in Africa, then certainly Globelec is there to respond to it. Looking forward, we have the potential for green industrialization. And maybe this is where future platforms may lie. We could be thinking about a platform that does green cement, green steel, green ammonia. I don't know whether we'll need to. Maybe commercial businesses will do that themselves, and we won't need to set up a platform. But that's a potentially very large future investment trend where we may be able to create something that accelerates and responds to that trend. Neil or Nuria, have you got anything you would like to add on to those points? I don't know whether we have any more questions.
Thanks, Paddy. So, I think scale is something which platforms can help provide, that they can help DFIs move beyond working one transaction at a time. Yes, it's a heavier lift setting up these platforms. But once they're set up, then they build their own capacity to pursue investments on their own. So I think they are an appropriate response to the challenge of how do we scale up flows of finance to emerging areas. And secondly, I think because they're long life platforms that will have a continued existence for 10, 15, 20 years, they can also evolve and adapt to new opportunities and market development. So we can't always know at the point at which these platforms are first established how their investment strategy will evolve over that kind of time horizon. But just to tie it back to the other question, well, how then do you select which platforms to invest in? I think it's really matching the DFI's strategic priorities and where they want to mobilize capital or invest at scale, and where there are gaps in the market, where there isn't enough private sector activity for them to invest in. And then to see what's feasible. Sometimes there'll be a gap for good reasons, and something just won't be ready and really isn't investable. So it's really just where there are those gaps, it's investigating and seeing, is it realistic to develop commercial opportunities here, and is it just that it's missing that first mover, that sponsor, to actually set up a business to take advantage of it. So, again, this is not something which can be used to solve all development challenges or fill all gaps in private financing. It has to be used in selective circumstances where it seems that there is something feasible which could be financially sustainable, but for whatever reason, private sponsors are not taking it forward on their own, and therefore filling that last piece by taking the initiative to sponsor a new venture can be the final piece that puts together that opportunity and financing.
While you were talking, Neil, I was just thinking about forestry. So, I mean, we have a African forestry platform, and despite being an enormous continent with a lot of forests in it, the African, plantation forestry industry is absolutely tiny relative to both the potential and the demand. In fact, Africa is an importer of wood, but the African forestry industry has also been extremely difficult to bring to a sort of sustainable and profitable point. But should that, take off, again, that is something that has the potential to scale enormously. But you are a little bit in the hands of fortune with how well these businesses do and what demand turns out. I mean, your follow-up question, Dr. Danzo asks about offtake. I'm struggling to think about how we. I mean, I suppose if we were setting up a green industrial platform to invest in green industry, that platform would be very much looking for sources of offtake that we could then build projects around and raise capital around. I'm not sure I have anything more intelligent to say other than that on that question, I'm afraid. I'm going to have a look and see if we have some other questions. Oh dear, geopolitics, not my strong point. I don't know what to say about how the shifting geopolitical landscape is going to affect these things. I suppose this means that certain countries might become only interested in doing things in certain other countries for political reasons. But thankfully, thus far, British international investments, and as far as I'm aware, most DFIs are not yet having to. We are all still led by what we see as development needs and not yet political considerations. And I'm afraid I also don't have a great deal of intelligent things to say about how things might change in the future. Neil, I don't know whether you see how politics intersects with what we're talking about here. No. Okay, Geeta, do we have any more questions? I know you had a couple of things.
Yes, sure. So I actually just posted one in the chat as I was unable to use the Q&A function.
Oh, apologies, I'm looking in the wrong place.
No worries. I'll post a couple more as well that I was thinking about. If we have the time, that would be great.
Okay. So this is about exiting, and whether we are, how we identify the point where a platform no longer needs us and we should get out, and whether that there's a question about whether we are then putting development impact at risk. I think BII and other DFIs, we all now have what we call our responsible exit procedures, where we are very much looking at if we are going to hand over ownership of a business to somebody else, what they're going to do with it, and we have to be we have to assure ourselves that they're not going to take the business in a different direction, in a way which is detrimental to development. But I think with many of the businesses that we're talking about here, for instance, Ayana, the people who bought Ayana, I'm sure bought it because they intend to continue developing renewable energy in India. Some of the platforms that we've set up are thinking on exits, includes, for instance, the growth investment partners, the lender in Ghana that I was referring to earlier. I think our long-term plan for that, or at least our long-term aspiration, is that local financial investors, Ghanaian pension funds, and the similar will, over time, start to put more capital into it, and BII will be able to withdraw once that lender becomes self-sustaining and it has local sources of capital. So I think that's our plan for that one. I think it's quite hard to generalize. You probably have to think about the right point to exit at different types of business. Gridworks, I know, has set up a way of structuring itself where it has a holding company, and then so it has a number of subsidiaries. So in the future, you could envisage different subsidiaries being exited at different times as those businesses mature. Neil, did you look at the Naria? Did you look at the exit question in your research?
Yeah, let me pick up on that question, and I think there are a couple of other questions about how do you avoid crowding out private investment, because what we're really talking about with these platforms is trying to crowd in private investment. Either you directly mobilize co-financing at the platform level, or you create sub-projects as Ayana and Global have done, which can be co-invested with private investors, or you grow a business to the point at which you can exit and sell on to private investors. So in all of those cases, what you're doing is you're creating ventures which generate impact through financially sustainable activities. So there's no need for the DFI to stay in that venture permanently. If it can be replaced by private capital, the impact is delivered built into the financial and business model of the venture. With the one exception of MedAccess, which was a slightly different example, none of these platforms were designed to rely on ongoing subsidy or concessional support. They were all set up with the idea that over time, and it may take a number of years, but over time, they will become financially sustainable. So in that sense, also, they're not crowding out private investment. It may be that they actually encourage other private investors who see the opportunities, in agribusiness, or in forestry, or in electricity generation or distribution, these kinds of industries. That the example of these platforms, as they become financially sustainable, may demonstrate to other investors the potential of these sectors. So they actually, I think, have the potential to crowd in private investment rather than crowding it out.
Actually, I want to respond to this point on competition. So we quite often have people asking us, or even implicitly criticizing us, or explicitly criticizing us for not doing this, why we don't lend to SMEs directly, and why do we do things through intermediaries, banks in countries, and other sorts of lenders in the local financial sector. And I think we should really think very carefully before we have a British government-owned lender in a country competing with domestic financial institutions. That's not something that we should be doing lightly, particularly if we waded in and were kind of undercutting local actors because we have a lower cost of capital. That would be very damaging. It could potentially be damaging to the local financial institutions. So a business like Growth Investment Partners was chosen very carefully because we didn't think that it would be competing. I mean, I suppose there's always some competition on the edges at the margins between different types of lending, but we only created that business because we saw a niche where we thought there was nobody else in it. And I think that it is quite important that our efforts to sponsor new vendors do not end up putting locally owned local entities out of business. You know, it's not what we're here to do. I'm going to see if any more questions have arrived. I mean, there is a question I'm seeing here about whether it's appropriate that a taxpayer-funded DFI is taking this level of entrepreneurial risk when private investors are not willing to do so. I suppose all I can say is I think that the reason we exist is to take risks that private investors will not do for the sake of for the sake of development. And we have a shareholder very much wants us to do that. And we have financial parameters set by our shareholder that allows us to do that. Having said that, there obviously is a point where we don't, I mean, you know, it's all very well to say, everybody loves to say, you should take more risk, you should take more risk. But then when things actually start going wrong all the time and you start losing money and nobody says, oh, well done, we were glad you did that. You know, there is a point where there is such a thing as irresponsible investing and too much risk. So we do have to stay, you know, we do have to be careful to stay with in the parameters that our shareholder has set us. And I think that we are doing that, and as ODI's research indicated, the platforms that we have created do, touch wood, all appear to be on a path to profitability. But I'm sure there are some things that you might imagine that we could do where one might say, actually, that's an inappropriate level of risk for a DFI to be taking. We are supposed to be investing taxpayers' money responsibility, and I believe we are doing that. If there aren't any other questions, I don't see any reason not to wrap up a little early. Neil or Nuria, have you got any closing remarks that you would like to make?
Thanks. I think, you know, just the last comments is really to reiterate that I think that DFIs are going to be asked to do more. We have the Financing for Development conference coming up in Seville at the end of the month, and so the focus will again be on how do we mobilize more private capital into places where that capital can do the most good, which is low income and frontier countries. And I think that these platforms and ventures offer one additional tool that DFIs can use to create those investment opportunities that can attract capital. So I think their relevance is only going to increase. I think it does require governments to be willing to take a longer term time horizon, indeed take more risk, as we were just talking about. But we think that the long term payoff can be well worth it. So we do think it's something which we encourage the owners and management of shareholders of the DFIs to learn from the experiences through the case studies and the report. And again, just to remind people that there are 12 case studies attached to the support. They're all available on the ODI global website. There's a lot more detail and nuance in there than being able to cover today. So I do encourage you to take a look at the cases when you get the chance.
And I'm going to take the opportunity of thanking Nuria and Neil for the work they did on this project. It's been a great experience working with them. And I'd like to also thank Geeta and the Private Sector Development Research Network for hosting this webinar. And finally, to thank you all for tuning in and listening to us. Thank you very much. And let's wrap things up now. Goodbye all.
Thank you.